Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to present today my work on the conservation status of potentially threatened Amazonian fish species. The Neotropical region extends from the central Mexican plateau around 30 degree north to the southern Argentinian, and it is home to the greatest concentration of freshwater fish biodiversity on Earth. So far, the ichthyologists have described nearly 6,300 species. Just to put in context, 2 in 5 of all obligate freshwater fish inhabit the neotropics. That means that 40% of all freshwater fishes are in the neotropic. The neotropical freshwater fauna is still very much in a pioneering stage of discovery, with dozens of new species being described each year. The current pace of discovery indicates that the actual fish diversity in the area exceeds 9,000 species, meaning that much as one-third of the species in the wild have yet to be described. Most of the neotropic freshwater fishes are members of just 5 major clades or taxonomic ranks. Together, these 5 clades accounts for 87% of all neotropic freshwater species and 96% of the Amazonian fish species. What is known is that the center of diversity for the freshwater uh, ichthyofauna in the neotropics is the lowland, the Amazonian lowland. But the higher endemism is located at the upland areas. Also, lowland rivers, rivers below 250 meters, often exhibit a remarkably high local species richness. And what it's interesting that this whole biota originated tens of millions of years before the geological formation of the modern Amazon and Orinoco River basin. And fishes and amphibians are among the most threatened of all vertebrates, and their species richness are declining rapidly at regional and continental scale. Or wild, an average of 30% of freshwater fishes are classified under threat categories by the IUCN Red List. And what is important to say that the neotropical fishes are increasingly threatened by many human activities. The most immediate and widespread impact comes from the habitat degradation, especially due to the deforestation and other land use changes from expanding agriculture frontiers and from the constructions of dams and other water diversions and destructors. And to classify species in threat categories, the IUCN provides a guideline for species conservation planning. The species are the conservation status are assigned assessed against 5 criteria. They are based on geographic range, population size, and population decline or increasing. In the neotropics, 2 countries, Brazil and Colombia, and a few other local studies in other Latin American countries, have this red lists with information of threatened species that followed the IUCN guidelines and protocols. So, what is known about the conservation status of the neotropical fishes? So we know so far that hundreds of fish species with small adult body sizes and restricted geographic ranges are already known to be threatened with extinction. Nearly 50% of all fish species in the neotropics are still waiting the IUCN assessment, and also that many Latin American countries do not have reliable information on this potentially threatened species. So we have 2 main goals. The first is to investigate if geographic and taxonomic data can be used to rapidly assess potential conservation threats from the Amazonian fish species. And second, we want to generate a preliminary extinction risk assessment for the Amazonian species that is still waiting for the IUCN assessment. As a first step, we compiled a list of the Amazonian fishes from a Schmeier catalog of fishes, including 2,720 species. And then we divide this list into subgroups. One, including only species that have already the IUCN conservation assessment, and another list including those species still waiting for the IUCN assessment. Next, we compiled a list of the Amazon species and their respective extinction risks using the red lists from Brazil and Colombia, both that use these guidelines from the IUCN. So besides the taxonomic database, we also compiled a spatial database including geographic information of preserved specimens that we obtained from the taxonomic literature and museum collections, and also from metadata repositories like GB, FishBase, and SpeciesLink. As a second step, we applied an automated cleaning pipeline to remove duplicates and geographic coordinates with potential errors, and also validate each one of the species distribution by plotting maps of individual species and comparing them with those published in the literature. After these steps, we obtain a database with including over 55,000 unique coordinates from about 2,200 species, representing 81% of the entire Amazonian ichthyofauna. With this database, for each species, we measured the extent of occurrence, OEOO, and also gathered species topographic elevation ranges. And once again, we divide this list into groups, one including the IUCN species with IUCN red list extinction risk assessment and those without the IUCN assessments. And to achieve our second goal, we use the R package CONAR to provide a preliminary conservation assessment for 757 Amazonian fish species for which extinction risks have not been yet assigned by the IUCN red list. We use the CONAR package to classify species only assuming the criterion B, the geographic ranges, and our preliminary conservation assessment classified species into non-threat and then the three other threatened categories, critically endangered, and vulnerable. As a result of this process, we identified that 7.8% of the Amazonian species are classified in one of the threat category defined by the IUCN, and the group with the highest number of threatened species is the cyprinodontiforms, the killifish. We also realized that extinction risks is greater in species with smaller geographic ranges, which inhabit upland rivers and which are recently and more recently described. Plotting the distributions, it's clear to see that higher extinction risks are in the species that are located outside protected areas, particularly in headwaters, in upland headwaters in the Tocantins Araguaia. And to achieve our second goal, we use geographic and taxonomic data alone to generate a preliminary conservation assessment for 757 species. They are still waiting for the IUCN assessment, and identified 311 species that can be potentially threatened. This number represents 41% of all species that are still waiting for IUCN conservation assessment. So we can expand the number of potentially threatened Amazon species from 129, there are today in the red lists, to 440 species as potentially or threatened or potentially threatened. So that means that nearly 16% of all Amazonian fishes might be threatened with extinction. Looking at the taxonomic orders, once again, the Cyprinodontiformes is the group with the highest number of potentially threatened species. And plotting the map, we see similar patterns. The potentially threatened species are often located outside protected areas and also in upland river system, often in the headwaters. The Xingu Araguaia, once again, seems to be area with a higher number of potentially threatened species, but also the Xingu Tapajós and the uplands of the Andean Cordillera in Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador. In conclusion, this study verifies that often threatened Amazon species were recently described, are range restricted, and are more frequently confined to upland areas of the Tocantins-Araguaia River Basin. Using CONAR, we predicted that about 311 species awaiting extinction risk assessment are potentially threatened. These potentially threatened Amazonian species are commonly located outside protected areas in the upland headwaters of the Tocantins-Araguaia, Xingu, and Tapajós river basins, and also the Andean Cordillera in Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador. The results expand the number of threat Amazon species from 129 to 440 threatened or potentially threatened species, representing about 16% of all Amazon fishes. The conservation efforts direct toward neotropical aquatic biodiversity must prioritize habitats in uplands, particularly in the headwaters located in the Brazilian Shield and the Andean Cordillera. And the conservation status of many freshwater fishes will benefit by prioritizing geographic areas with the largest number of coexisting and threatened species. One of the examples could be the Tocantins-Araguaia River Basin. Thank you for your attention, and I'll be glad to answer your questions.